Hey everyone, happy Wednesday, happy hump day to all. Thanks for joining us for our inaugural episode, if you will, for the Countdown series. Today what are we going to be talking about today here, John?
We're talking a little bit about med device and FDA regulations coming down, but I think we also want to kind of introduce the idea of this forum and what we're trying to do with it. We can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll just kind of keep it informal and open face, and we'll start on time here for the interest of time. But certainly we can make available this recording and any other material after the fact for anyone that's interested in sharing it. So
And I think one more thing before we jump there is we do want to talk about, like, we're trying to create a kind of interactive series as we move forward here. So we're going to introduce a topic today, but the idea of this countdown series is going to be looking at bringing on questions from our audience and our customers and just the industry and partners to just really talk about product security in general in the markets that we serve. We're going to focus on med device today, but we'll be talking about automotive and other things moving forward. But we really want this to be an approachable series where we kind of get some live feedback from the audience and really bring people into the conversation. We do a lot of research and a lot of work with customers, but, like, what do you want to know about? So today we're going to introduce a topic around the FDA and the compliance coming up, but the series itself, we hope, is going to organically evolve.
absolutely. So any sort of suggestions to that point would be really appreciated as we go here. Any ideas or people we should even try and bring on the show here. So cool. So on that note, then, John, I mean, do you have anything to kind of share a little bit more about, you talked about the series, but, what it is all the other kind of entities and groups that are focused on product security that we're engaged with?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of like the why would you listen to two guys speaking here about any topic and
That's
taking
right.
up some of your time, but Cybellum, we're a technology company, technology and some services, but what we really try and do is partner with the industry. So sure, we're here to push our software and try and get as many customers as we can, but we really take the time to work with the manufacturers. In this case, today we're talking about med device, but we work with the market we serve from a customer standpoint, but then we're also very active involved with the standards and the alliances. So who's writing the regulations? What are the formats they're looking for? What are the influencers doing in this space? And we kind of wrap this around another podcast we do that's really a more formal series around, called Left to Our Own Devices, where we actually bring on the influencers, like Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA, Alan Friedman. We've got automotive leadership up there too. This podcast, we're trying to ask the questions you're trying to get addressed to. We're inviting people to come on and talk about not even Cybellum, just the industry and product security. Now, to kind of show the difference, I think this series we're going to run, we're going to talk more about Cybellum itself. The Left to Our Own Devices, which we'll give you a link later, that's really focused on the industry. It has nothing to do with our technology or what we offer. It's really just what's the industry is doing that we're serving in. So kind of those top three things we feel are a good mix where it allows us to bring technology to market, but also partner with where the market's going. This is a very dynamic space. So we kind of focus on those as tenants. And then, really all we do as a company is really around product security. We don't have a large portfolio of other tools in, like, the PLM arena or even the software development arena. It's just around that use case of product security and what that means to the industry. The last thing to point out is we are backed by LG. So we've got some, even from an automotive checkbox, LG was the first company to be CSMS compliant for these cyber regulations in the automotive space, which was, part of that is the work we did with LG. So we've got some good backing and we've got some good traction in the industry.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
why you should listen to us today.
Yeah, it definitely underlines that conversation piece of it all that we're trying to foster here. So, yeah, well, I guess
Who
why don't
are
we
we?
do? Yeah, who are we? Who's these couple guys talking at you this morning? Why don't you go, John?
John Auld. I'm the general manager of Cybellum North America, and I manage all our activities here and have been really, really engaged in the med device space, which is a topic near to me today. So excited to kind of chat through that with you.
And I'm Sean Barry. I'm this other mugshot here. I do business development here, and I've been with Cybellum coming up on a year now. And prior to this, I was in the PLM space. So all about getting products from an idea to market. I really love this kind of convergence of where we're at in terms of product security. So in terms of today's agenda, what we want to try and do here is just, start with like the why product security, why now? Like, why is this whole something we should care about today? And then talk about, as John mentioned earlier, what's changed in terms of the FDA and their requirements, some of the dates that we need to keep in mind. And then, finally, which is more of the thought-provoking, part where we get asked all the time is like, how to get started, and, how do we kind of step into this, set up a product security strategy and a team and organization, and really start to push these kinds of elements into the kind of existing motion that every company that has a product has been going through for, dozens of years now, which is getting products to market and keeping them there. So that's the agenda for today. And I guess what we figured we could start with is with a bunch of numbers to try and confuse everyone right off the bat.
Yeah, and this, the landscape's changing, and some of you may have seen previous podcasts we did or webinars we did. I think this was with PTC a while back, but these numbers here are really reflective of med device, and med device is the most targeted vertical out there, and because it's the most lucrative. You look at the cost of a breach. I think in the next slide you might add some color, but back in 2021, 22, we're looking at this was 7.13 million per breach in a hospital, and it's 10 to 40 times more lucrative than credit card numbers in the dark web. So hospitals have 85,000 connected devices in a hospital on average, lots of points of entry, easy targets, very profitable. So of course we've got more attention on this industry itself. And if we look at maybe a couple examples, Sean, and what we're seeing like today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this one right here on the left-hand side is an AP news article from, just last week, my birthday, where it wasn't my birthday present, but basically, there was a massive cyber attack that actually infected, I think it was like 5 healthcare delivery organizations all across the country, all the way from California to here in Pennsylvania. And what this meant was there was dozens of hospitals that are actually down and had outages, and they were having to roll back. And the IT effort involved in that with a hospital staff that doesn't have a lot of IT resources is pretty monumental, to say the least. And then there's some other headlines that are more so from last year, but that all kind of underscores the importance of here's the attack path and the target, which is these HDOs, and then of course where's the Achilles heel at, which is the medical devices has now kind of entered the target sites, if you will, and this is where there's a lot of focus today, and this will actually kind of help us rationalize why now.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of 3 things that are bringing this together. Is number one, it's easy to execute. The data on this, the amount of data exchange, and even you see things like ransomware as a service being provided out there, just crazy innovative ideas of how to get these attacks going, and they're easier to execute than ever. Not from just the attack paths, but just the amount of data people have access to and how to do it. The payments are easy. Electronic transfers, crypto, NFTs, there's tons of ways to get paid with very little traceability. The biggest one, though, is reliance on digital infrastructure. So I think the article that I think we were reading the other day, Sean, was about the hospitals. I mentioned in the previous slide that it was the average attack is like 7.13 million per breach. It's like 11 million in a year. The average has gone up. So it's because they're so reliant on digital infrastructure. What they do is denial of service. And you looked at these hospitals had to divert all elective care, all new ambulance visits, all ER had to go to other hospitals nearby because they were under ransomware attack. Mm-hmm. So you lose all that revenue. So of course they're quick to pocket to pay because they got to get back, because everything is reliant and everything is connected. So the targets there, the reasons there. So you have the easy to execute, easy to get paid, and that they are so reliant on connected devices that they're likely going to be behind the scenes paying for some of these ransomware attacks.
Yeah, it's already happened. I certainly don't have $11 million, but
no.
They know that the HDOs they do have access to it. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and that's where there's this massive, I guess, focus on the device manufacturers now. Going back to the Achilles heel kind of analogy, this kind of brings us from the why now in terms of product security to what's changed, which is the so-called Omnibus bill, which passed at the very end of last year. Massive bill, but within it, the FDA was given the authority, the requirement, the budget, basically just all the marching orders required to actually go out and enforce what they like to think of as their wish list in terms of cybersecurity requirements for medical device manufacturers. So we've already kind of talked about, the vulnerabilities playing a huge part into all of this, right? There's 26,000 publicly disclosed vulnerabilities last year. And really at the intersection of all of this is the cyber devices, which we're going to talk about in a couple of slides from now. But really what I wanted to spend a minute on is just to kind of bring people that might not be up to speed on the Omnibus bill. Hope there's not too many of you, but certainly just kind of recap what it all has to do with medical device manufacturers. So there's essentially three or four key pillars, right? So first and foremost, OEMs, medical device manufacturers that provide cyber devices, need to provide a software bill of material moving forward for the submission process, pre-market submissions. And this actually starts October 1, where there's a hard requirement for having, any new products that are going to market need to have an SBOM as part of that application. Otherwise, they're going to refuse to accept the application itself, right? Building off of this is a couple of kind of pillars more so focused on post-market surveillance and monitoring cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So, manufacturers need to have a plan to monitor, identify, and address post-market cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So be able to identify and prioritize vulnerabilities in your products, and then being able to kind of close the loop and patch them and mitigate the risk through the life cycle of the asset. And we can talk more about that as we go. And then, of course, I guess I kind of cannibalize a little bit of this, but basically having design, developing, maintaining process that give reasonable assurance that the device and related systems are secure and can handle that kind of activity. And then there's always the classic caveat, comply with future requirements that demonstrate cybersecurity. And actually, we're everything is pointing to both in these working groups that we participate in, but also some of the engagement that we've had, that there's going to be an updated final guidance around cybersecurity requirements in Q4 of this year. So there's more coming down the hill, so to say. So anything you want to add here, John, before we kind of march forward?
No, I think everyone loves when they put in comply with future requirements. Keep the whole lens open for interpretation, and a lot of the series that we're trying to do here is going to be to try and zero in on some of those gray areas and what that means. Certainly, as a provider, we have visions of where we want to take the company and technology that we think align with the market, but we're always under discussion with like the FDA and CISA, as well as our customers and prospects and just the industry on, is that the right vision? We're only a technology provider and we participate, but we kind of need as an industry to earn the right to automate a lot of this stuff. So that future requirements, yes, is could be a very scary topic to get into, but that's kind of our view too, is that this platform and this space is really evolving as we move forward and learn more with the industry.
Yep. So this kind of rounds out the what's changed, right? And I think what we're going to do is use this as kind of like a informal agenda, if you will, to kind of pull apart this bill and add some more color to it based off of some of the kind of more formal guidance that they've provided on their website than other places. And then we've also had some other insights to share from some conferences and whatnot that I thought was particularly fun to be able to share in this forum. So first off, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what like a software bill of material is, where it comes from, and what all it composes of it, right?
Yeah, so that's typically the first thing that we're asked to kind of engage with the customers. They want to solve the SBOM problem first. So how do you get an SBOM? What do we do with it? What's in it? All those kind of questions, right? So we manage this software bill of materials where you can we've got some technologies. There's binary scanning. We can read in source code. SBOM's exported from source code packages, but we give a place for you to list out all those software components, whether they're open source, whether they're COTS or soup lists, and have one place to manage the SBOM itself. Inside there is all the open source packages, all the versions, whether they're statically or dynamically linked, just all the things that are kind of important from a contextual view of the software that's on that device. We've also, part of what we do is we do manage beyond that hardware bill of material, your interfaces, a lot of the cryptography information. And we have shared that with some of the regulation, and there's interest in that, but today's focus is just on the SBOM, right? We want to know what the software bill of material is in that product. And then be able to export that in Cyclone DX or SPDX and give a machine readable format that's really a transparent view of here's everything on my product. The reason we have an SBOM is so we can start figuring out what vulnerabilities are in my product. So then you take your SBOM, you map that to the CP, CV process, and you figure out what are my vulnerabilities. And then you figure out really how to manage that. So you've got a bulk of vulnerabilities, and how do you mitigate that risk? We can also look at things around licensing and policies. So, open source compliance, licensing risks from a legal perspective, policies like if we've got personal information inside a file still for GDPR regulations. So it's just one place. Now, I'll give you a bit of color on this too. Like a lot of med device, especially is M&A. And you see these big companies are buying all these smaller companies that make up these business units or operating companies. So each one of them kind of had their own unique development tools. So their software development process or the PLM process, they come in and they're kind of bolted into a company, right? So each one within a company may have several different aspects too. We sit across all that. We kind of put a layer of governance above it, and we can look at all these software bill of materials in one place. So you can look at the corporate level SBOM policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a ton of value even just in like some of the side use cases, licensing policies, adherence to standards, sort of regulations. Just knowing what's inside these kind of like black boxes, right, of your product. And of course, being able to do something with that information is super powerful. And then there's like a whole like kind of like supplier use case as well that I think is really interesting. And it's come up a few times, just like, are we working with the right people that are giving us the right kinds of inputs into our product that's going to help us make this product and keep it secure for a long period of time. So, yeah, I think that, to kind of recap it, just because we have it on the slide, of course, there's like a hardware component that we like to advocate for. And then, of course, the crux of it all is the software piece of it. And then all that package level kind of detail that John had outlined and getting it in the right format, and, it being a couple of clicks away is super important, that readiness factor, right? So very cool. So moving along here. So we talked about the software bomb, but one of the things that always comes up is, what actually do I need to provide a software bill of material for? And so we were fortunate to have Dr. Schwartz on our podcast some time ago. It's a great episode. You have to check it out. And so, it's really, this kind of regulation is focused on the medical device manufacturer. But what products of theirs is it actually applicable to? And so at the recent Health ISAC presentation where she gave, I think, the keynote, she actually went into a greater level of detail there that isn't publicly available from anywhere I can find, at least, except at that event and some of the kind of speaking engagement she does. But basically, they wanted to kind of clear up the air because this question comes up a lot. And so a cyber device, from their perspective, and this is the intent of the law, is, it's any medical device that can be potentially connected to the internet, right? So if it has a USB port, but it's totally air gapped, but there is a USB on there that you could theoretically put a Wi-Fi dongle on, like that's a cyber device. Similarly, these are, it's a little bit of a nuanced thing in medical device, but do you have a software that is regulated as a software as a medical device? Well, that's obviously a cyber device. It's a software that can be connected or ran on a computer or in the cloud or whatever. Obviously, that's a cyber device. And then I even had one with a recent customer where they were talking about, they were asking this kind of question because it was like an internal debate, but it was, if and it sometimes comes down to definitions, but I think it's interesting to share is, we can port into the product and do some kind of diagnostics into, our medical devices that are in these healthcare facilities. But it's not connected to the internet like all the time. And it's like, well, that the internet is connected to it, not the other way around in this weird kind of way of thinking about it, but it's still a cyber device. So that was some sort of internal struggle that they were both amused, but also wrangling with at their particular company. But it's ultimately it's a broad interpretation on purpose, and it kind of evolves into this total product lifecycle concept that I think John or I teased earlier, which is it's relating it back to what's already there. There's already this like TPLC kind of motion. A lot of things are handled under this guise, and especially when you look at like recalls and stuff, and they're thinking about it and acting on it in the same exact way. So
Yeah, and I'll add to that comment, like companies wondering if they're fall under this or not. And I kept hearing a lot of the yets, it's not us yet. And this really, it was pointed out in the conference, what I heard was yet means you're eligible too. So it's not like we're not there yet. It's not, if you have a USB port, if it's even if it wasn't intended to be connected, you're eligible too. So it's a pretty broad net they cast on this whole thing.
yeah, and it's also legacy products, things that have been on the shelf or being
Yeah.
used for 30, 40 years. I mean, you and I come from an industrial background. There's PLCs that are out there that are 40, 50 years old, still running factories. I mean, there's still medical devices doing the same thing. So, and those are still on their purview. And if you think about the challenge though, like the people that might have released those products at your company 30, 20 years ago, they're likely not in the same position. They might even be long retired. And so how do you come back around and install product security? It's a big question. I mean, we're just starting to scratch the surface, but this is the requirement. So moving along, we will. So one of the other things that I actually really liked from Dr. Schwartz's presentation, she actually talked a little bit more about reasonable assurance. In that bill, what does reasonable assurance mean? And so she talked about it being like the rungs of a ladder. So if they do show up and want to test, it's the the veracity of your process for your cyber program, or your product security program, they want the reasonable assurance we talked about at the beginning, right? So she kind of walked it through, and I'll just kind of go through this as best I can. But they want to see first and foremost, did you demonstrate that all cyber risks were considered? So did you, do you have a threat model for your product? Have you mapped all the kind of attack surfaces and the likelihood of, where a software kind of breach could be exploited? Were all risk identified? And then did you, make an effort to mitigate these risks, right? So the example she gave was, do you have a VEX report, or do you have readily available software architecture information on hand, right? And then of course you got into like some of like the testing type things. Do you have adequate testing controls to show that this product is working as intended? And that's where they talked about like having pen tests and fuzz tests, and it kind of gets back into like this V model world of things, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then finally, do you have a plan to make sure that this product remains safe and secure right through its life cycle? So how are you patching vulnerabilities? How does this play off other systems that you have? And how is this kind of information used to kick off a new software development lifecycle and run a post-market surveillance program? So these are all kinds of different components that she gave examples to for kind of questions they might ask if they show up at your door, and they're already doing that for the post-market surveillance piece of this bill, as far as I understand. But yeah, I just thought it was very interesting. I got a lot out of her talk, and we wanted to relay this information because it's not really out there.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing. You kind of skirted around a little bit, but like that knocking on the door. I mean, I'm looking at our list of attendees here, and I think some of them are here. In that closed room conference, you always wonder, did they really knock on doors? Did they really come and announced? That was a conference we're at, and there were 2 to 3 vendors that stood up and said, yes, we've been knocked on, we've been audited. So they are knocking. this comes straight from maybe one of them that's listening wants to come talk about that in one of the future episodes. But
Yeah.
it was when that topic came up and people were kind of like, well, are they going to come or not? They're like, they stood right up and said, yes, we've been had the unannounced visit to kind of give us a little audit on how we're doing with product security. So yes, they're out there, and yes, it's happening.
Yeah, I mean they have the budget, they've staffed up, they've got tons of roles they're still trying to fill as of today. And on top of it, I mean that post market piece of the bill is live. So it's they're out there throwing their weight around, so to say. So pretty interesting. So you know, based on the last few slides that we've kind of gone through, what we want to do is just try to at least list out all the different kind of components that you might need in order to either start a product security program, or maybe you have some gaps where there might be some opportunities to fill. And so the way that I was kind of looking at it is first and foremost, it's almost like an asset management kind of use case to get started, right? You need a software bill of material for every single cyber device. So that level of information to be able to kind of be the bedrock of your program. And then of course, a threat model, have you been able to, map out all the kind of attack services we talked about earlier. And then of course, ancillary to all this is like testing, testing the device itself. And this feeds all of this, your post-market side of your program of product security, right? So being able to use, your ingredients list to monitor for any, major software vulnerabilities out there. And then of course, be able to, analyze them and mark their status, their kind of adjudication level. If you accepted the risk, is there something, a plan against it to fix it, that sort of thing. That's what ultimately builds out your VEX report from the last slide. And then finally, if there's a major vulnerability like log4j or something like this, I mean, if it's significant enough for you and your products and your portfolio, this might actually warrant a kappa. And then of course, how does that feed downstream to, is it a design change, and does it update the DHF or the DMR, that sort of thing? So how does it tie in with all these other different systems? So, we just want to kind of put together like our own bill of materials, if you will, just based off of all the other publicly kind of available information, and even some of the stuff that we've heard in some other engagements with the FDA. So there's that. If you don't have anything to add there, John, I guess I'll march forward. Interest of time.
Yeah, we're running up at time, but yeah, it's been an interesting topic with a lot of data. That list that you what you need list, there's a lot in there, and it covers a lot of the aspects of the entire development life cycle. So, Sean alluded to in the beginning, like we're both PLM background guys, like product lifecycle management. How do you take a product from the very early conceptual stages all the way through setting up factories? Product security really fits along those lines. So really what we're showing here is the product security's workflow with going through the design, development, post-production phases up top, and kind of some of the big buckets that you have to go through. So we talked up front about threat modeling and requirements definition. So really setting up your policies and your models up front, and then moving into managing the SBOMs and the assets themselves through the different versions along the bottom, through conceptual versions, to the versions of the product as it's going through development, and then even in post-production. Each individual version needs to be monitored out in the field. So against that, we're running certain use cases like software license management, vulnerability management, these things that we hear about in the topics. So it's again, I used the term before, it's a very wide net we're trying to cast here. Above this all sits a product security management center, where how do you roll up these KPIs and track them? We talk about certain KPIs the FDA is looking for. How do you look at that across your entire portfolio and actually make decisions off that, roll that data up? So key KPI dashboards are on the product security management. Now, what's really important though is that you fit product security into your existing life cycles. In the bottom, you see ALM, PLM, SBOM import, binary scanning, ticketing systems. We know you've been developing products for years, and you've got enterprise systems you've deployed for years. So how do you weave product security into those existing processes where we're taking data out of those platforms when we need it for analysis, we're putting artifacts back into it. So against your master records for release, how do we make sure you have an accurate SBOM that's in Cyclone DX format that's acceptable to the FDA? So we think through all those things. We've got an ecosystem of partners. We've created some of those integrations, and we've created those processes and workflows so we can take these use cases that you need to get through and plug them into your enterprise. And so that's kind of our view of product security in a very short nutshell that we can go through today. We could spend a whole session on any one of these boxes.
Yeah, I actually had some things I was thinking about adding, but again, in the interest of time, maybe we save it for another session, and maybe we can bring in some more interesting people on to talk about, what is they might do that's specific to one of these boxes alone. So, no, good stuff. So, just kind of charging forward, this is a webinar, so we do have to leave you with, 3 key kind of considerations. Rule 3 there, folks. I think the first thing to keep in mind is, timing is everything, right? So post-market side of that Omnibus bill live today, as you heard from John, people are knocking on, manufacturers' doors, the FDA'S, at least. And then of course the refuse to accept kind of line in the sand is October 1. So starting in October, any new applications in the 510K phase after October will just be refused to be evaluated until they have a software bill of materials or deemed incomplete without that. So that solves the time kind of piece of it. At least it talks to it. Scalability, we saw that on the last slide. There's a lot of different tools. And then of course, there's other tools that actually mean something to this process as well. So being able to kind of unify all these tools and processes helps with actually being able to kind of scale up a program. And if you think about like the life cycle of multiple different products, different versions, and then of course all the kind of change management therein, there's a lot of different inputs. So trying to kind of build this on your own is very challenging, and that's often where people fall down, unfortunately, is because you end up creating your own product to maintain internally, and it requires a lot of IT bandwidth. When you do have this kind of unified process, there's something amazing that comes off of it, which is the ability to actually measure everything, right? So being able to measure the right KPIs, which matters. And I think actually this could be our next session. We were talking about this before. There's some really good KPIs that are coming out of the working groups, specifically Health ISAC, that reference some things that the FDA put out last year that might actually be as part of the final guidance in Q4 this year. But nonetheless, just being able to manage, a portfolio at scale, how many different products are what different stage of their cyber digital hygiene, where are your greatest threats coming from? That's a really good way to kind of prioritize your internal resources. So those are the kind of the 3 key considerations. And then, as we promised at the beginning, here's a QR code that you can pull your phone out and easily sign up on whatever podcast platform that you so prefer to listen to our Left Our Own Devices podcast. And for anyone that is going to be at DEF CON tomorrow and the next couple of days, I'll actually be there. So please feel free to reach out to us or find me on LinkedIn, Sean Berry. And, would love to grab a bite or a beer and just talk about some of this product security stuff further. So, I'll leave this up for a hot second, see if anyone, needs a couple more moments to scan this. John, do you have anything you'd like to add before we jump to the Q&A?
No, I was going to mention that you could start. We've only got chat for this Q&A, so if you want to add some questions, then that'd be great. But I also want to throw out to the audience, like, because we're always trying to learn and make this better. Like, I always think about Q&A and having the old switchboard where the guys like calling in. We have live callers, and if there's like a webinar platform that actually has live feeds to discuss and chat Q&A, I'd love to have some actual voices come in here rather than just the chat. But we welcome the chat, but we'll take that. That was last minute audible here. I'd love to find something like that actually have people chatting in with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Having people kind of call it in Howard Stern style. That'd be great.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Well, very cool. So I'll just flip to our.
We got a couple of chats.
Yeah, we got a couple in here in the submission bucket. So, so first of all, I'll just tee this one up for you, John. So, what does the FDA want to see in an SBOM? What are they trying What are they looking to discover? There we go. It's a twofer. Two questions there in one.
Twofer. So they want to see, so we listed that before. It's the, any open source components, any COTS list, any software you bought or inherited, and then soup list. So just anything that's in that product itself, they want a listing of that, and then they're really trying to discover really how safe and secure is it, or where might the vulnerabilities be. It's really just a level of transparency. So I'm sure they want to discover quite a few things, but the first level is just getting them a machine readable format like in Cyclone DX or SPDX that they can ingest. And really, I don't think anyone's ever trying to kick anything back or refuse to accept. They just want to make sure the transparency is there so that manufacturers are doing their best to disclose that we have these products. They could either choose to disclose that they've identified vulnerabilities and accepted the risk, which is fine too, might be very minimal risk to what's there. And then just being transparent with the industry and that they've got a program that they're trying to do the best they can.
Yep. Good answer. I'm going to take a couple more here. So there's discussion whether or not any negative consequences will come from not meeting these requirements. Okay. I'm sure we could get hacked, but our engineering team doesn't feel like the chances are high. How do I go about convincing them we should meet these requirements? Interesting. Do you want to take that one, John? I don't think I've seen too many engineering teams try to skirt around cyber requirements or requirements nonetheless, but any thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's a few, I could think of so many angles here. So let's say you're a small manufacturer. I've seen, actually, it's in one of the leading med device. If you go and look at like the industry investor relations, they talk about even M&A practice. They're looking at cyber hygiene of potential M&A targets. So you're a small company, you probably should have a process in place to have some of these artifacts because it could be part of the due diligence to purchase. Negative consequences are at the FDA, like we talked about earlier. They're knocking on people's doors. If you have nothing in place to show them, you could have products pulled off the market. So sure, there's minimal chances of being hacked, you may think, but if you looked at the undisclosed hacks that are on the HDO side and your customers, they're going through a lot more of this than you think. So they are targets, and I would say the consequences are many. A lot of those are yets, but you'll get there.
Okay. Maybe we ought to bring someone on that does pen testing. I think that could be fun one day. Okay.
That's a big topic. Yeah.
Absolutely. So here's another one. Thanks for the session. How do we create an SBOM?
Okay. So creating an SBOM, this could certainly be an entire podcast session, because look, you have the outputs from the source code tools, right, that have everything that's been in there. They're very good with accuracy of component versions and dependencies, and it's a very long list. And then you got the binary side that really is more accurate on what actually ended up on the component. Then there's build artifacts and there's compilers you look at. So there's an art to SBOM creation. And a lot of that we're trying to address with technology today, and we've done some of that, being able to bring this stuff together. But I think what's good, important to note here, because I think I see some companies here that may be, they don't have a full staff for this yet. And I will mention that, Cybellum, we don't do a ton of services, but we do some very targeted value-add services. So let's say you have a bunch of products coming up, or maybe 2 products coming up for 510K submission with PMA. Or you want to get started in this. We do offer analyst services. We'll actually we'll white glove and create your SBOMs for you. We'll investigate your artifacts. We'll get them in a platform. We'll get them under management, get them under vulnerability monitoring. So we'll kind of walk you through that process, and we'll guide and mentor you until, teach you to fish. Or we can just use technology. But in the end, an SBOM kind of has to be looked at. It's not. There's no one-click button today in any platform that's going to tell you exactly what's on that tool,
right,
in that product. So there's a bit of an art to it.
Cool. So I think there's one last question. It goes into, you spoke about measuring cyber hygiene. Are there any KPI groups are adhering to? I'll take this one. There's some really good, as I mentioned, draft guidance on, I think there's 3 or 4 KPIs that the FDA recommends. One's like defect density, another's patch velocity, and the third one is time to patch, I think it was. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think what we'll do is we'll actually peel that off into its own webinar or session for this series. So maybe that'll be the next one. But in the meantime, I think the key KPIs are just looking at, just what activity is necessary today for this October 1 deadline. And that is, how many software bill of materials do I have for how many products do I have? And it's just the basics, like getting your Bedrock totally aligned. And then from there, you can worry about some of the other like more advanced KPIs that you can step into, which is like, tying this all together with like your patch process or your software development lifecycle or, that sort of thing. Just, basic KPIs for now. And then of course, building on that is what I'd probably recommend. So that looks like it's it for today. I mean, as John mentioned at the very beginning, we're really excited for any sort of suggestions you might have. I'm almost out of coffee here. I know we're a little bit out of time, but if you get a couple moments, please, provide any sort of feedback you have. And, we're looking to kind of grow this over time and expand the discussion. So thank you very much for joining the inaugural class, if you will.
Yeah, this was fun chatting with you. And
Absolutely.
to Sean's point, if anybody out there listening that wants to jump into one of these episodes with us and pick a topic, you want to talk about threat modeling, let's learn together. Let's tackle any of these. So appreciate all the participation, and we look forward to future adventures with you.
Thank you all. Have a great Wednesday. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.